Hello. My name is Russell, and this is the part of my life I was told never to talk about. Everyone thought I was broke. My own family believed it or pretended to. They cut me out quietly, disowned me without shouting. My wife packed her things and left when I couldn't explain what was really happening. What hurt most wasn't losing the money. It was watching the people I trusted turn my silence into proof against me. They thought I had nothing left. What they never saw coming was the truth worth $100 billion. The evenings started the way most weekdays in my life always had. Predictable, controlled. I was still at my desk when the office lights began shutting off one by one. That quiet signal that everyone else had already decided their day was done. I stayed as usual, not because anyone asked me to, but because I was raised to believe being reliable mattered more than being noticed. I straightened papers that didn't really need straightening, locked my drawer, and checked the time. Dinner at my parents' house was set for early evening. It always was. Same day of the week. Same expectation. Show up calm. Leave your problems outside. The drive over felt routine, almost comforting. Streets I knew by heart. Houses that all looked the same in that polished upper-middle-class way. I remember thinking how tired I felt, but also how determined I was not to let it show. I told myself that whatever tension I'd been carrying could wait. Family dinners weren't the place to bring unfinished business. Their house looked unchanged. The lawn trimmed just right. Porch light already on. Inside, the familiar smells hit me immediately. Roasted meat, warm bread, something sweet in the oven. Everything about that house always suggested stability, order, control. It never seemed to reflect who I was or what I carried, but I'd stopped expecting that a long time ago. Everyone was already there. My siblings sat comfortably, talking like they'd been mid-conversation long before I arrived. My mother moved between the kitchen and dining room with the same quiet efficiency she'd always had. My father sat at the head of the table, posture straight, voice measured. No one asked how my day had been. No one ever did unless there was good news attached. I took my seat and listened. They talked about schedules, plans, things that affected everyone except me. A trip coming up. A decision already made. I nodded when it felt appropriate. I smiled when it was expected. I told myself not to read into it. This was normal. It wasn't personal. But the chair they'd placed for me wasn't where it used to be. It was slightly off to the side, close enough to be included, far enough to feel intentional. I noticed it right away, though I pretended not to. Conversation moved around me, never landing. I was there, but not part of it. I told myself it was nothing. People rearrange things. That's what families do. I swallowed the discomfort and kept quiet. Halfway through the meal, someone mentioned my situation. Not directly. Not with my name attached. Just a casual comment framed as concern. "He's had a rough stretch lately," one of them said, as if I weren't sitting there. It landed harder than if they'd pointed at me outright. I realized then that they knew something I hadn't shared. Information had traveled without my consent. Decisions had been formed without my voice. I felt the air in the room change, subtle but unmistakable. My father didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He spoke calmly, the way someone does when they believe authority is already on their side. He said I needed to be realistic. That responsibility meant knowing when you were becoming a liability. The words sat there between us, heavy and clean, like it had been rehearsed. I waited. I don't know what I was waiting for. Correction. A softer word. Someone to say that wasn't fair. No one did. That was when I reached into my pocket and pulled out my house key. The one I'd carried for years without thinking about it. I placed it on the table right between the plates. The sound it made was small, controlled, final. I didn't explain. I didn't argue. I told myself this was maturity. That silence was strength. That I could fix this later, once emotions settled. No one stopped me. I stood, picked up my jacket, and walked toward the door. I didn't rush. I didn't look back. Outside, the air felt cooler, sharper. The porch light cast a clean shadow behind me as the door closed. I didn't know it yet, but that door closing behind me wasn't the end. It was permission. I didn't look back when the door clicked shut behind me. The porch light cast my shadow long across the driveway as I walked to my car. The house I used to call ours, my parents' mine by memory, stood still, quiet, undisturbed by my exit. I slipped behind the wheel and shut the door slowly, more out of habit than emotion. But inside, something cracked. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, engine off, the silence pressing against me. My breath fogged the glass in short bursts. I didn't have a destination in mind, just the urge to not be parked in front of a home that had just surgically cut me out. Eventually, I started the engine and let the car drift out of the neighborhood, letting the soft thump of each turn signal guide me forward. I didn't plan my route. I let red lights and right turns decide where I went. It wasn't running away, I told myself. I was just giving them time, giving myself time. I turned the radio on, not for music, just for noise. Static, ads, somebody talking about weekend traffic. Anything to drown out the sound of that key clinking on wood, playing on loop in my head. Half an hour later, I pulled into the parking lot of a roadside motel. Neon letters buzzed overhead, blinking one at a time. Vacancy. The office was small, windowless, with a clerk who didn't look up when I walked in. I handed over my card, took the key, and walked back to the car in silence. Room 214. The room was exactly what I expected. Thin carpet, walls too close, curtains that didn't quite shut. A single overhead light flickered before settling into a dim yellow hue. There was no real smell, just the faint suggestion of bleach and air that hadn't moved in a while. I dropped my duffel bag on the floor, more habit than utility. I hadn't packed anything. I didn't even remember grabbing it. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. First once, then again. I ignored it. I didn't even check who it was. I knew the patterns. A few from my sister, maybe ones that sounded like concern but were mostly duty. A couple from my brother, probably sarcastic or vague. None from my father. He didn't reach out unless someone died or the insurance lapsed. The screen lit up again. I turned it face down. I told myself this was temporary. Families argue. People overreact. They'd cool off. Things would go back to normal. Maybe next week we'd pretend tonight didn't happen. Maybe they'd even joke about it, the way they joked when someone brought up the time my cousin got drunk at Thanksgiving and confessed to stealing grandma's jewelry. That's how families deal, right? Quiet resets. No apologies, just new dinners. But something in me knew this wasn't the same. I lay on the bed, fully clothed, shoes still on, staring at the popcorn ceiling. My head replayed every detail from dinner. The way no one looked directly at me, how their conversations danced around topics they knew would corner me. The polite distance. It wasn't messy. That's what made it cruel. If they'd yelled, at least I could have yelled back. But being erased doesn't come with something to fight. I finally picked up my phone, thumb hovering over the lock screen. 23 missed calls. 3 voicemails. No texts. That told me all I needed to know. No one wanted to leave a paper trail. Out of reflex, I opened one of the voicemail previews. It was from my mother. Russell, I hope you're okay. We all love you. It's just been hard to watch, you know? Maybe this space is what's best for now. I paused, replayed the sentence. Hard to watch. Like I was some sad play they'd sat through for too long. Like my quiet presence had become unbearable background noise. I didn't finish listening. I put the phone down again. For a few minutes, I stared at the TV, off and covered in dust. I could see my own reflection in the black glass. Unshaven, eyes a little red, not from tears but from staying quiet too long. I didn't look broken. I just looked erased. A childhood memory bubbled up. I must have been 6 or 7. I had accidentally knocked over a glass at a family party. Spilled juice everywhere. No one yelled. My mother just smiled tightly and said, "That's why we don't touch things without asking." The room went quiet for a beat, and then the adults moved on. I wasn't scolded. I was ignored. That was the lesson. You make a mistake, you disappear for a while. And now, decades later, the same rhythm played out again, except I hadn't even knocked anything over this time. I'd just been myself too visibly for too long. The phone buzzed again. This time, a message preview lit up. From my sister. They just needed to protect what's left. Russ. Don't make this harder than it is. I didn't open the full message. The preview alone hit hard enough. So now I was the threat. I scrolled back through old photos. Birthday parties. Family barbecues. Pictures I wasn't even in, though I remember being there. I noticed something I hadn't before. I was always behind the camera. Holding the drinks. Setting up chairs. Driving someone who drank too much home. And now I wasn't even invited to the table. I laid the phone down, screen up this time. I didn't bother silencing it. I wasn't going to answer. I just wanted to see who would keep calling when they knew I wouldn't pick up. That was its own kind of test. I thought silence was neutral. That if I didn't speak, I couldn't be accused of saying the wrong thing. But as I stared at that ceiling, I started to realize. Silence can be filled by anyone with a louder voice. And my family had always been good at speaking for me. Sleep didn't come in waves that night. Came in fragments. When I finally opened my eyes, the room was still dim, the motel curtains leaking in a thin strip of early light. I hadn't set an alarm. My body woke itself, alert in the way it gets when something unresolved is waiting. I showered quickly, folded the blanket back the way I'd found it, and checked out without a word more than necessary. Procedures were easier than feelings. Outside, the air was cool and clean. I drove a few miles before spotting a small diner just off the road. Nothing special. A place built for people passing through. I slid into a booth near the window and ordered coffee. The waitress poured it without asking my name, called me Han, and moved on. For the first time since the night before, I felt something loosen in my chest. Here, I wasn't a problem to be managed. I was just another man drinking coffee too early in the morning. I let myself sit there longer than needed, watched the door open and close, listened to the low hum of conversations that had nothing to do with me. That anonymity felt like relief. It also felt like a warning. When I finally picked up my phone, I did it deliberately. I wasn't bracing for anger. What I saw was worse. Messages stacked neatly, calm in tone, carefully worded. Explanations, summaries, clarifications of what had happened at dinner, written by people who hadn't been on the receiving end of it. One text said, "We're just worried about you. Last night got intense." Another read, "You seemed overwhelmed. Dad thinks space will help." I stared at those lines, coffee cooling in front of me, and felt something click into place. They weren't asking how I was. They were documenting me. My silence had already been translated into their language. Not pain, not restraint, instability. More messages came in as I scrolled. Phrases repeated themselves with slight variations. Not in a good place. Taking things too personally. Needs time to get himself together. No one asked what I'd intended when I set that key down. They didn't need to. They'd already decided. That's when I understood what had really been taken from me. Not the house key. Not the seat at the table. The story. They were telling it without me, and because I wasn't interrupting, it sounded complete. I considered calling. I imagined explaining myself clearly, calmly, laying out what had actually happened. But even as I thought it through, I could hear how it would be received. Defensive. Emotional. Proof that they were right to worry. Every word I offered now would be folded neatly into their version. So I didn't call. Instead, I typed a message to one person. Not the loudest voice. The one I knew would pass it along. I kept it short. Measured. "I'm fine. I'm not confused. And I'm not unstable. Please stop framing me that way. This ends here." I read it twice before sending. No accusations. No history lesson. Just a boundary, placed carefully. The response came faster than I expected. "You're reading too much into this. Everyone's just trying to help. Don't make things harder than they need to be." That sentence told me everything. They thought I was bluffing, or unraveling. They didn't hear a line being drawn. They heard a crack. I paid for my coffee and stepped outside. The sun higher now, traffic picking up. Sitting back in my car, I felt the shift fully for the first time. This wasn't a misunderstanding that would smooth itself out with time. It was a rewrite in progress. And I wasn't angry yet. But I was done pretending this was accidental. I didn't speak a word as I pulled onto the freeway. The sound of the engine filled the silence. But inside me, something else was humming low, steady, building. I wasn't angry yet, but I was done pretending this was a misunderstanding. That clarity had weight, and I felt it settle into my chest like a stone I wasn't planning to set down anytime soon. By the time I reached the city, the skyline looked sharper than usual. Cold, unbothered. Traffic lights blinked their mechanical rhythm as if nothing had shifted in the last 24 hours. And yet, for me, everything had. I didn't have a real plan, just facts I needed to check, lines I needed to draw. I pulled into the parking structure just off 12th, across from the building I used to walk into like I belonged. The walk to the elevator was familiar, but this time my steps were deliberate. No nods to the front desk, no smiles, just the quiet hum of self-possession. Before I entered the office, I sat in my car and opened the thread of messages again, this time with purpose. No part of me expected warmth or apology. I wasn't hoping to be wrong. I was tracking something now. Timelines, phrasing, who said what and when. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't just hurt feelings or a family misunderstanding spilling into my professional world. This was methodical, coordinated. They were acting like I'd already been erased, like I wasn't part of the equation anymore. Not just socially, formally, legally. I closed the message app and leaned my head back against the seat, letting the realization land. I wasn't being excluded because of emotion. I was being procedurally removed. Inside the building, everything looked the same. Beige carpet, too cold air conditioning, framed quotes about teamwork that now felt like sarcasm. But the people, they looked through me, not quite ignoring me, but cautious, guarded, like they'd been briefed. "Hey, Russell," someone said in passing, voice clipped and polite. Another added, "Good to see you." But their eyes flicked away before mine met theirs. And that's when I knew the story had outrun me. I stepped into the glass conference room, already half full. The meeting was underway. I wasn't late. No one had told me it had moved up. I stood behind the chairs for a moment, scanning the printed handouts. My name wasn't on the new client roster. The project I'd pitched, built, and run for 6 years had been reassigned. Quietly, efficiently, they didn't even pause the conversation. Just one glance, a nonchalant "Russell, will loop you in after." And the room continued without me. That was the moment I saw it clearly. This wasn't anger or punishment. This was a controlled deletion. Neat, painless, professional. I walked out without saying anything. Back in my car, I didn't start the engine. I sat in stillness, the kind that doesn't comfort, it isolates. I thought about how quickly people adjust to your absence when it's more convenient that way. The weight inside me shifted. Something clicked into place, not loudly but with finality. They thought I would stay quiet because I always had. Not today. I walked back inside and found Paul, the regional director who had been a friend when it benefited him. He looked up from his laptop like I'd interrupted a sacred ritual. "I need a word," I said, calm, even. He raised an eyebrow. "Sure, but maybe later? This isn't the best time." "It's the only time I'll offer it," I said, still not loud, still not angry. We stepped into the hallway. I didn't waste breath. I know decisions are being made without my input. I know my role's been minimized, and I know none of this is accidental. Paul opened his mouth, but I didn't give him the space. "I'm not here to argue. I'm telling you plainly. If this continues, there will be legal consequences. I've documented everything. I won't be erased quietly." His face twitched barely. "You're under stress, Russell. Maybe take some personal time," he offered, voice syrupy and practiced. "No one's out to get you." That response, that smile, it was worse than being yelled at. It was the assurance of someone who thought they still held the upper hand. They believed I was bluffing, or unraveling, or both. I left the building without looking back. And I knew the door wouldn't be open again. They had already made their decision. So had I? That was the moment I understood they weren't trying to fix anything. They were trying to finish me quietly. I carried that thought back to the motel with me as the afternoon slipped toward evening. The sky had gone dull, that flat gray that makes time feel heavier than it is. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the room felt smaller than it had earlier, like it had shrunk while I was gone. I didn't turn on the lights. I set my keys on the table, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the silence press in. The air smelled faintly of cleaner and old carpet. Neutral, temporary, just like everything else in my life suddenly felt. My body was tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. Not exhaustion from work or stress, but the kind that comes from repeating the same role for too long. The reasonable one. The one who smooths things over. The one who says, "It's fine," even when it isn't. I started replaying moments I hadn't thought about in years. Conversations where I'd swallowed my opinion to keep the peace. Decisions where I'd stepped back so someone else could feel important. Times my father had said, "Let it go, Russell. Be the bigger man." And I'd taken that as a compliment instead of a warning. Sitting there in the half-dark, I wondered if this was simply who I was. Not unlucky, not betrayed, just optional. That thought opened a door I hadn't meant to touch. I imagined leaving town. Not dramatically. No speeches. No confrontations. Just packing what fit in the trunk and driving until the signs changed. A different state. A different routine. No more explanations. No more defending a version of myself no one seemed interested in hearing. The idea didn't feel brave. Felt quiet. Comfortable, almost. Like slipping out of a room where you've overstayed your welcome. I pulled out my phone and opened a message thread with my family. My thumbs moved without resistance. The words came easily, which should have scared me more than they did. "I'm sorry for how things went. I never meant to cause problems. I take responsibility for my part." Apology. Responsibility. Regret. The language of retreat. I read the draft back to myself. It sounded calm, mature, exactly like the version of me they expected. All I had to do was press send, and I could start disappearing with their approval. That's when the notification came through. Nothing dramatic. No angry call. Just an update buried in a thread I almost ignored. A forwarded document. A short line that said, "This was finalized earlier today." I frowned and opened it properly this time. Something had been moved. Signed. Approved. Without my knowledge. Without my consent. Something I was still legally tied to had changed hands while I was sitting in traffic, while I was being told to take some time. My chest tightened, not with panic, but with clarity. This wasn't emotional fallout. This wasn't family tension spilling over. This was deliberate, and my silence hadn't kept things calm. It had made them faster. I deleted the apology draft. Not because I was angry, I still wasn't, but because I finally understood the cost of staying quiet now. If I disappeared on my own, they wouldn't just take my place. They'd rewrite it, and they'd do it cleanly. I slipped the phone face down on the nightstand and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The hum of a passing car outside broke the stillness, then faded. I didn't make a move that night. I didn't call anyone. I didn't send another message. But I didn't leave either. For the first time, that felt like a decision. I didn't need the sunrise to tell me morning had come. I was already awake, sitting upright on the edge of the motel bed in the pale pre-dawn light. No dreams, no panic, just that silent, steady recognition. Waiting wasn't neutral anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. This wasn't fear. Not anger either. It was something colder, clarity stripped down to its bones. I stood, stretched my back until it cracked, and reached for the notebook I'd tossed on the dresser the night before. The old habit of journaling had taken on a new purpose. This wasn't for healing. It was for mapping. I stopped writing about feelings and started listing facts. Names, dates, signatures, unreturned calls, moved accounts, messages left unread, not by me, but by them. I drew lines between them, small arrows forming a kind of blueprint. Every crossed-out section led to the same conclusion. This wasn't carelessness. This was choreography, thought out, prepped, executed in plain sight. It wasn't about whether I mattered. It was about ensuring I didn't. By the time the city started to stir, I had already shaved, changed into a clean shirt, and packed my things with deliberate precision. I wasn't going back to that office for a confrontation. I had no plans to tip my hand at all. But I needed a space where I could think, uninterrupted. Place without memory. Just after 7, I drove into the city and rented a small executive office suite. One of those anonymous spaces used by traveling consultants and people trying to look more together than they felt. The receptionist didn't know my name. That helped. Inside, the silence felt different. Not numb like the motel. Not emotional like home. Just neutral. That neutrality helped. I pulled out the laptop I hadn't touched in days, booted it up, and began logging into financial platforms, checking legal filings, tracing shared access. Everything had a fingerprint if you knew where to look. I wasn't angry at what I found. I was focused. One account had been reassigned. Another quietly closed. A property title amendment had been logged without my signature, but referenced my verbal acknowledgement. I'd never given it. But there it was in a legal note I hadn't been copied on. This wasn't sloppiness. This wasn't someone exploiting a chaotic moment. This was planned. They didn't expect me to vanish, they counted on it. I sat back, the cursor blinking on my screen. I could feel it then. Not panic, but a shift. The scale of what I was up against wasn't just emotional betrayal. It was operational erasure. And every hour I stayed silent had made their version stronger. My instinct screamed to pick up the phone, demand answers, force recognition. But that kind of move only works if you want validation. I didn't. What I wanted now was leverage. Leverage required stillness. So I practiced it. Every impulse to react I filed away. Every urge to prove I was right, I let dissolve. I would not be the unpredictable one. I would not give them another sentence to quote out of context. Instead, I documented. I screen captured. I printed hard copies. I highlighted timelines. I created a folder without putting it on the cloud. No forwarding. No backup. Just me and the files, offline, analog, traceable only by touch. I wasn't collecting evidence to make someone pay. I was collecting it so no one could say I wasn't there. Mid-morning, I scheduled a meeting with a quiet contact I knew from my prior work. Someone whose job involved verifying what others preferred stayed vague. We met over coffee in a nearby building's lobby cafe, two professionals in casual tones. I handed them a few pages and asked only for verification. No opinions. 30 minutes later, they returned with confirmation. My suspicions weren't just likely, they were accurate. That was enough. When I stepped back into the private office, the sun had risen fully. Traffic outside was steady. Phones were ringing down the hall. And inside me, for the first time in days, there was no fog, no ache, just direction. I understood then. This wasn't about clearing my name. That idea had belonged to a previous version of me. Someone still hoping this was just a misunderstanding. This was now about interrupting a quiet removal already in motion. And I'd do it without warning them first. 2 days later, the energy around me shifted. Not loud, not obvious, but like the moment before a thunderstorm. When the wind changes direction and the birds go quiet. I felt it first in the delay of returned calls. Then in the emails, shorter, more carefully phrased, like every word was now being weighed. I didn't need confirmation to know something was moving beneath the surface. It began small. A contact I used to speak with directly rerouted me through an assistant. Then someone else mentioned a meeting I hadn't heard about, one I should have been included in. They smiled politely as they spoke, but there was something behind their eyes. Not guilt, caution. The language started to shift too. Just making sure we're covered. Need to double-check some alignment. Phrases that sound neutral until you realize they're designed to keep you at a distance. I heard my name in a context that didn't belong to me. Someone referred to me as highly reactive during a meeting I wasn't invited to. Another said I had personal conflicts that might interfere with professional decisions. No one accused me of anything directly. They didn't need to. The suggestion was the message, and it spread fast. That was the first hit. Not physical, not even legal. It was reputational. A quiet wave of doubt passed through the same channels I'd once trusted. It didn't take much. Just a few comments left uncorrected. Just enough hesitation in someone's voice. People didn't need to believe it fully. They only needed to believe it might be true. That was enough to make them step back. I recognized it instantly. This wasn't a defensive move. This was offense. A counterstory had begun to circulate, one designed to precede mine, to turn anything I said after into a reaction. They were reframing me as unpredictable, fragile, someone who was unraveling. Not out of concern, but convenience. If I was struggling, then my facts could be dismissed as emotion. If I was reactive, then their silence looked like protection. The irony was sharp. The same people who dismissed me as too quiet now accused me of being too loud. I watched it unfold with the same restraint I'd practiced for weeks. I didn't correct every whisper. I didn't send long messages demanding fairness. I noted the names, logged the language, marked the shifts, because this wasn't about winning sympathy. This was about stopping a strategy. And now I saw what it really was. They weren't just trying to take things. They were trying to discredit the only thing I had left. My word. If that broke, it wouldn't matter what I knew or what I could prove. I could walk in with evidence, and they'd smile and say, "We think he's going through something." It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. They were taking out my ability to speak before I even opened my mouth. I adjusted. The plan I'd been building wasn't going to hold. Too many moving pieces. Too much dependence on people staying neutral. Neutrality was gone now. They'd forced a faster timeline, a sharper approach. I couldn't wait for everything to be perfect. I needed one move, just one. Something they couldn't spin, couldn't soften. Something real, traceable, visible. And it had to be quiet. Loud moves could be dismissed as desperation. Quiet ones changed the landscape. By late afternoon, I sat in the back seat of a rideshare car, staring at the street through tinted windows as we moved through the business district. The driver had music on low, a local jazz station, barely audible. My phone was on airplane mode. I didn't need distractions. I just needed precision. I had already identified the pressure point, one document, one signature, one timeline that had been falsified. I had confirmation from two sources, a time-stamped record, and a paper trail that contradicted what was filed. I didn't need to call anyone. I didn't need to explain. I just needed to submit it to the right hands, through the right channel, without saying a word. That submission wouldn't trigger alarms. It wouldn't spark confrontation, but it would align everything. Their story depended on no one looking closely. Mine depended on nothing but the facts. As the car pulled into a parking structure, I gathered the envelope from my bag. No digital trail, no subject lines to trace. Just paper, ink, date, truth. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice. It was clarity, and they wouldn't see it coming. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice. It was clarity, and they wouldn't see it coming. I stepped out of the elevator just after 10 that morning. The building was all polished wood and quiet lighting, the kind of place where voices naturally lower. The receptionist glanced up, nodded once, and pointed me toward the boardroom at the end of the hall. I didn't need directions. I'd been here once before, years ago. Different purpose, different version of myself. Inside, the air was still, neutral. I was early by design. I took my seat at the far end of the table, placing the manila envelope in front of me. I didn't bring a briefcase or laptop, just the one item that mattered. They filed in a few minutes later, 3 of them. 2 attorneys I recognized, 1 I didn't. They offered practice smiles, sat across from me, and opened their folders like this was just another line item on their schedule. Procedural. Boring. They didn't know yet. There was no small talk. I didn't offer any. When the formalities were done, confirming names, noting the time, stating the purpose, I reached for the envelope and slid it across the table. No speech. No warning. Just paper. One document. Plain, dated, verified. No exaggerations, no interpretations. Just facts, a timeline, a signature, a transfer. and it didn't match the story they'd been selling. First, they blinked. One leaned forward, scanning quickly. The second stayed perfectly still, but his eyes tracked every line. The third, the younger one, sat back, confused. I said nothing. I wanted them to sit in it. This wasn't a challenge. It was a correction. When they looked up, the mood had shifted. No more smiles. Just calculation. They tried. One of them cleared his throat and offered a suggestion that perhaps the document had been misfiled, maybe even misunderstood. I didn't move. Another said it might require clarification, maybe a follow-up conversation. Still, I said nothing, because the power of a fact is that it doesn't argue. It just is. They knew it. I saw it in the way their confidence thinned out. What they expected to be a containment session had become exposure, without me saying a single accusatory word. And then the most telling thing happened. One of them, the senior, started choosing his words differently. Out of an abundance of caution. Given the evolving nature of this situation, all of it meant one thing. They realized the angle had changed. I watched as silence settled in, not out of awkwardness but recalculation. The same people who once spoke over me now measured each pause. I didn't need to speak loudly. I just needed to let the truth sit long enough to be undeniable. Then came the moment I'd planned since the beginning. I reached into my pocket and took out the house key, the one I'd placed on the table days ago, when they thought they were closing the door on me. I placed it on the boardroom table again. Same key, same gesture. But this time it wasn't surrender. It was boundary. No explanation. No flourish. Just a quiet, deliberate signal that I no longer lived under their terms, literally or metaphorically. No one touched it. No one spoke. The youngest one looked at the others as if asking silently, "Do we say something?" But they didn't. They knew they'd lost the timing. A few minutes passed before one of them finally asked, in a voice trying to be gentle, "Would you be open to a private discussion? Just to clear the air?" I smiled, not with sarcasm but certainty. "No, thank you." It wasn't cold. It wasn't angry. It was final. I stood, collected the copy of the document I'd brought for myself, and left the envelope on the table. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to debate. Outside, the city hummed as usual, cars passing, people on sidewalks, voices rising and falling in the rhythm of daily life. Nobody knew what had just happened in that room. But I did. And more importantly, they did. The moment wasn't loud, but it landed. I walked 2 blocks to a small cafe and sat by the window. I ordered a black coffee and waited, not for a response, but for the stillness to settle. For the first time in weeks, I didn't check my phone, didn't anticipate fallout. I just sat, let the day move. That's how I knew it worked. The noise stayed behind me. I ended something, and then nothing happened. No fallout, no apology, no fanfare. Just the sound of life moving on, without them and, more importantly, without me looking over my shoulder. Weeks passed the way they do when there's no fire to put out. The quiet didn't come with a ceremony. It came in pieces, waking up without dread, brewing coffee without a pit in my stomach, taking walks that weren't about escaping. I didn't mark a date on the calendar. I just noticed one day that my shoulders sat lower, my jaw unclenched. The noise had finally stayed behind me. I live near the coast now. Not in a fancy place. Just a modest rental where I can hear the ocean if I leave the windows cracked at night. Mornings are slower here. I wake with the light instead of the alarm. There's a corner of the kitchen that catches the sun around 7:15, and I sit there with my coffee, letting it warm my face. There's a rhythm to my days now. Coffee, silence, reading the paper front to back even if most of it doesn't matter to me. I walk along the waterfront late mornings, sometimes nodding at the same faces but never stopping for conversation. No one knows my history here. No one calls me by a role I didn't choose. The absence of chaos isn't empty. It's just quieter than I expected. A different kind of fullness. But quiet doesn't mean invisible. About 3 weeks in, the messages started to arrive. Not many, just a few. My brother's wife sent a short one. "Thinking of you, hope you're well." My cousin forwarded an old photo of us at the lake when we were kids. My sister emailed something that read more like a press release than a letter. We've all been through a lot. Maybe someday we can talk. Careful language. No apologies. No ownership. They weren't reaching out to reconnect. They were covering themselves just in case. I read each one once, then deleted them. Not out of anger, just clarity. They were too late and too safe. If you'd asked me months ago what I wanted from them, I might have said answers. An apology. A return to some version of before. But the distance gave me something better. Perspective. I used to believe silence was maturity. That not reacting meant I was the bigger person. But over time, I realized silence was just what they needed from me to keep their version of things intact. I trained myself to shrink so well, I didn't notice I'd disappeared. And when I finally stopped performing that role, they didn't know what to do with me. So they paused, hoping I'd reset myself. I didn't. These days, I make my own coffee. Not because I'm the only one here, because I want it done the way I like it. I sit on the small balcony that overlooks the rocky stretch of shoreline. There's a bench 2 blocks down I visit some afternoons. I bring a book but rarely open it. Just sit, watch, breathe. Somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. I didn't reclaim the house. I left the key where I'd placed it. I didn't chase down explanations or rewrite the history they bent. And most of all, I didn't try to win back their approval. That was the real shift. Not what I took, but what I left behind. They assumed I'd fight to get back what they thought mattered. But I'd already let go of the need to be understood by people who never really saw me. I didn't want the seat at the table they offered under conditions that erased me. I let it all go, and it didn't take anything from me. Success used to look like inclusion, being part of something even if it cost me. But here now, success looks like not needing a witness, not explaining my worth, not packaging my peace in a way they'll validate. A life that doesn't require defending, that's what I built. Quietly, intentionally. I didn't burn bridges. I just stopped crossing ones that led nowhere. Some days I think about calling one of them back, just to hear how far they've spun the story. But then I remember I already know. Their version isn't the point anymore. Closure didn't come from confrontation. Came from release. Not revenge. Not forgiveness. Just letting the story end where it naturally expired. This isn't the kind of ending that earns applause, but it's the kind that lasts. As I walk the quiet stretch along the coast, wind tugging gently at my sleeves, I pause at the overlook and breathe in the salt air. No weight, no ache, just space. They thought the truth would bring me back. What it gave me instead was permission to move on.